Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do an early power rankings using a tier maker. So it's A, B, C, D and F as you can see on the screen here. I will probably do this again in the middle of the season, but this is after round 3. So let's get started. Starting off with the Adelaide Crows. Very impressive to start the season. 3-0, exceeding everyone's expectations including mine. Very, very optimistic. Definitely finals bound. Top 4 really in sight. I reckon I'll just chuck us in A. Very, very impressive. Brisbane, well, they are 3-0 too, but 3 comebacks. So they barely beat West Coast. So they had a really unconvincing win there. But Geelong's win was quite impressive, especially after the second quarter. They were down by 32 points and won by 9, I think. They are 3rd on the ladder, Brisbane, so I reckon you'll have to chuck them up in A2. They're still up to par, still a premiership contender. You'd think, hey. Carlton next. Very, very disappointing. Very disappointing. 0-3. 0-4 likely if they lose to Collingwood tomorrow. Very bad. And well, their first halves in every game so far they've been winning, but they always stuff it up in the second half. They just can't keep their momentum for 4 quarters straight. I'm sorry, but I'll have to put them in F. They are looking absolutely horrible. Collingwood next. Well, after a poor first game, they bounced back with 2 good wins against the Western Bulldogs and Port Adelaide. The Port game was very impressive, 91-point win. They are still looking like a top side. I reckon a B. I'll have to probably see a bit more on Collingwood to chuck them up in the A tier. So I reckon B, definitely finals bound, but I'm not sure if premiership bound or whatever. Essendon next. Like Carlton, they've been pretty disappointing. They are 1-2. They barely beat Port. Well, it was a pretty... No, that was a poor game anyway. That was not a great game. But their first 2 games were pretty bad. Well, Hawthorn, they were in the game, but against the Crows, they got absolutely smashed. So, Essendon, can't say much about them. I reckon... not quite F, but I reckon D tier for now. Fremantle, well, their first 2 games weren't great, were they? In Geelong, they got absolutely thumped. Fair enough, it's in Geelong, but losing by 78 is just not on. And they lost to Sydney, I believe, but that was bad luck. And of course, they beat West Coast in the Western Derby. That was a pretty big win, but wasn't anything convincing. Bit of an interesting one. I think for now, there's a few impressive things on Fremantle. Maybe a C. Geelong next. They're 1-2 as well. Their first game was very impressive against Fremantle, but St Kilda, they were disappointing. Pretty much, they were disappointing, and then last round they choked a 32-point lead against Brisbane. So, bit of a hard one for the Cats. But I think they'll bounce back big time against Melbourne. I think they're bound for a big win there. They haven't really looked overly impressive, but maybe top of C. Yeah, I'll just chuck them there for now. Gold Coast next. They have been impressive too. 2 really big away wins against Melbourne and West Coast, even though they're looking like bottom 4 sides so far. Really big wins though. They absolutely thumped both of them. Ben King is looking absolutely magnificent. And best start of the season they've had, I believe. Gold Coast, I reckon. Top of B. I just need to see a little bit more, and then I could put them up in A. GWS next. 2-1. They just lost to Hawthorn, but that was in really tough conditions. There was a whole lot of wind there. Their first game was really, really impressive against Collingwood. They just pretty much dominated them from start to finish. And against Melbourne, against Melbourne in pretty bad conditions, they got the job done by 3 points. But GWS are looking pretty good. I really think that their current ladder position will change highly in a good way. So, premiership contender, I reckon. Well, they've got a whole lot of talent, and I reckon they are looking like an A-grade team right now. Hawthorn next. Can't say too much about them. They have been absolutely magnificent. 4-0. 4-0, and they seem to get the job done every time every time they've been under pressure during the game. They seem to bounce back and always win. Not in really close fashion, but by at least 3 goals. They've pretty much all of their games so far, they've been pretty impressive, especially opening round against Sydney. In Sydney, they were pretty good. Well, you have to put them in A tier. They are premiership contenders. Melbourne next. They have been shocking. Absolutely shocking. How can you lose to North Melbourne by 10 goals? That is just unacceptable. Melbourne have been absolutely horrid. And against Gold Coast too, don't forget. It's Gold Coast where their away record is terrible. Melbourne have been absolutely shocking. Their first game was alright, but then the past 2 weeks have been absolutely, you can't get worse than that. North Melbourne, well, they are looking pretty optimistic. They took up to the Crows on Sunday. They were pretty competitive for quite a bit of the game. In the third quarter, I believe, they were within 8 points. I was pretty nervous myself watching the game as a Crows supporter. Thinking that it wasn't going to be a convincing win. Well, it was in the end, but North Melbourne are looking pretty good. They obviously smashed Melbourne by 10 goals. That's the best footy they've played for 6 years. They're looking pretty good, North Melbourne. I reckon C for now, since they're still in a rebuilding stage, but they're looking pretty promising. Port Adelaide, not too great. The game that they played last week against Essendon was very boring to watch. They kept fumbling. They were very messy. They couldn't get clear possession. It was just, they played terrible. And their only win against Richmond, but it's only Richmond, so they are not looking too good. I know they have injuries, but the succession plan, not going to plan at all. Port Adelaide, D tier. They are not making finals, I reckon. Richmond, well, can't say too much about them. They are in the midst of a rebuilding stage. Well, they beat Carlton, but Carlton were just shocking that game. But they got sent back down to earth after their last 2 weeks against Port Adelaide and St Kilda. They got thumped both games. They haven't been terrible. Both games have been competitive. I think against St Kilda only they were competitive in the second quarter. They hit the front, but bit of a hard one. Do I put them in F? I'll probably have to, because they're looking like an 18th place side for sure. It's an understatement. St Kilda, interesting one. Well, they've got a lot of injuries, but they were pretty impressive against Richmond, even though it was only Richmond. And the week before they beat Geelong, but the first game was pretty bad. They got thumped by 10 goals. bit of an interesting one for the Saints. I don't think I'll put them in a D tier. I'll probably put them C, I reckon. Sydney, they haven't been too impressive in their first 3 games. Well, they beat Fremantle in a very close, emphatic fashion. Bit of a hard one for Sydney because it's only the first 3 games, and probably a B tier because they're still probably looking like a top 8 side. They probably will make the top 8, you'll think. West Coast, I mean, they really took it up to Brisbane. They kicked the first 5 goals of the game. And their first game was shocking, West Coast, and they didn't perform that great against Fremantle. West Coast, you'll probably D. They haven't looked really terrible apart from the first game. Probably a D tier. Western Bulldogs last. Who did they play first? North Melbourne. They won by like 15 points, and then they just lost to Collingwood because of the umpires. They probably should have won that game, and then they beat Carlton. Western Bulldogs, well, they're sort of looking like a finals contender. They're looking actually kind of decent. I reckon a B for now. So these are my power rankings. So my premiership contenders, probably Hawthorn and Brisbane for now, I could say for sure. The Crows and GWS are quite close, and Gold Coast close to the top 4 at the moment in my power rankings. Collingwood as well, and then in the middle tier, probably like fighting for top 8, probably Sydney, Western Bulldogs, and Fremantle, I reckon, and Geelong. So that's a bit of an insight, but thanks for watching my video. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one, probably next week with my tips, and then maybe a gather round vlog. I don't know if it's going to be multiple videos or just one big one. I'll figure it out close to the time, but anyways, thanks for watching and have a good one. Cheers.